for The Line of Fire with your host, activist, author, international speaker, and theologian, Dr. Michael Brown, your voice of moral, cultural, and spiritual revolution. Michael Brown is the director of the Coalition of Conscience and president of Fire School of Ministry. Get into The Line of Fire now by calling 866-34-TRUTH. That's 866-34-TRUTH. Here again is Dr. Michael Brown.
Thanks, friends, for joining us on The Line of Fire. 866-34-TRUTH. I'm going to open up the phone lines for anything you want to talk to me about, anything you want to ask me about, anything you want to challenge me about. I'm going to do that today, but I'm going to cover some very specific ground, and we'll mess with some sacred cows today, I think, but going to do our best, as always, to speak the truth in love. I never intentionally say something just to spark controversy, ever. If I spark controversy, it's because a subject needs to be addressed that's controversial. But my goal is not to spark controversy, not to get calls or posts or likes or dislikes or whatever, or get attention. My goal is to bring light and not just heat. My goal is to open up a controversy so that we can get some insight and that we can have constructive discussion about it. That's our goal. 866-348-7884. From the January 6th hearings to some of the latest controversies about biological males competing against biological females to a few other things of interest that we will talk about. President Trump's relationship with Prime Minister Netanyahu. That's interesting. That's worth talking about, reflecting on. But we'll get to that as things unfold. I find something really interesting. When I say something on politics and culture that people agree with, they'll say, Dr. Brown, we're so glad that you address these things. We're so glad that you're not only just reading scripture and telling us what the Bible says, but applying the Bible to real life issues. And we're so glad you're doing this. And then I'll say something that they don't like or differ with, and they'll say, you need to stay out of politics or just stay with the gospel. So here's the deal. We're on the air where these things, some days, as you know, we just get in the word together. We just dig into the scriptures together. And some days we just focus on Israel-Jewish issues. Some days we just focus on culture. But our goal is to help you, to equip you, to strengthen you. And as we hear back from so many of you, it's so heartwarming as we come to the end of the year. Yeah, we get the attack, the flack, the negative, of course. But we hear from so many of you that our message is making a difference in your life, that you're getting infused with faith and truth and courage as you listen. And that's why we are here. We want to see you healthy and thriving in every way. And we know as that happens, as God's people are healthy and thriving, then that will impact the world around us. The brighter and more clearly our light can shine, the more the darkness will be dispelled. Okay, so January 6th hearings going on. You may say, well, it's slanted in Congress and you've got almost all Democrats and so on, and it's not going according to proper procedure. Don't want to discuss that. I want to look at what happened on January 6th as we look back to it, okay? So here's what I tweeted out. Feel free to agree with me or disagree, but here's what I tweeted out. My take on January 6th, 2020. Number one, what happened last year, or actually beginning of this year, should have said 2021, it cannot be called an insurrection, as heinous and inexcusable as it was. To call it an insurrection is a planned revolt to overthrow the government. I do not believe that's what there may have been some little groups and individuals with those things in mind. But I'm sharing my perspective, having looked at it, analyzed it, as you have as well. It was heinous, it was inexcusable, it was shocking that such a thing could happen in America. It was the storming of the Capitol, but I don't believe it was an insurrection. That's the first thing. Second thing, I don't believe President Trump expected it to happen. When he unwisely called for people to walk to the White House or to halls of Congress with him, to the Capitol, I don't think he was expecting this to happen. I don't believe he wanted it to happen. I believe he was shocked or mortified or grieved or upset that it happened the way it did, that it went as far as it did. I believe he wanted there to be a clear showing to the those in Congress and to Vice President Pence, hey, look, this is how many American people are very upset. They don't like the fact that this election was stolen, right? I believe he wanted there to be a show, but not the way it went down. My opinion. Number 3, I do believe his reckless speech up until then, in the months before that, when you are the most powerful person on the planet with the biggest platform on the planet, and you were talking about how things were stolen and it's wrong, etc., and getting people to feel like our nation's being stolen from us. Because remember, we were never going to have another fair election after this. 2022 looked pretty fair as far as I can tell. Or the 2021 election we just had in November looked pretty fair as far as I can tell. But I believe Trump's reckless words in the weeks leading up to that, even set up in the months before it, but in the weeks leading up to it, and then that day saying we're all going to walk, and with everything that was happening, the tone of that rally up until then, and others who had spoken before him, and their provocatory words, that it was reckless of him as the president to say what he said. So, number 1, I don't believe it's right to call it an insurrection. I refer to it as the storming of the Capitol. If I say the insurrection, that's in quotes because that's what others are calling it. 2, I don't believe he wanted it to happen. I don't believe it was decided. He said, well, he should have acted more quickly that day. Could be, but I still don't believe he wanted it to happen. I don't believe that was his goal. And he has to know. He has to know that it leaves a terrible tarnishing of his records or accomplishments. And it feeds the fuel of the fire of the worst critics. So that seems clear enough that he would understand that. But I do hold him responsible for his rhetoric as president. Too much is given, much is required. So that's been my perspective for months. Nothing that's come forward has changed my thinking on that. And you're free to agree or differ. Now, one more thing with President Trump is he's back in the news. Why are you talking about Trump? Because he's back in the news. So an Israeli journalist has released a book about Trump, the Abraham Accords. So amazing accomplishments, unprecedented accomplishments in the Middle East for any of our presidents since the modern state of Israel. President Trump did things that no one else had done. President Trump did things that everyone said could not be done. And I remain deeply appreciative of that to this day. But according to the book, the author had 2 interviews with Trump, one 90 minutes long. Former President Trump has not denied a word of this. He's not denied a word of it. I've not seen any public denial. If he's denied it, I've not seen it anywhere. That he said that when Prime Minister Netanyahu called President Biden to congratulate him on his victory and made the tape public, that he did that Trump has not spoken to him since, and used an expletive him. He's not spoken to him since then. And he felt stabbed in the back. Because again, in Trump's mind, he's sure the election was stolen. Now you're congratulating the next guy that comes in. You need to show loyalty. And again, that to me is the downside of Donald Trump. That to me is why, with all the good that he did, you have to recognize the amount of collateral damage that he did. The fact that we had the horrific events of January 6th, that has so tarnished not just Trump, but Trump supporters, as if we were all there, as if we all stormed the Capitol, as if we all wanted those horrific things to happen that day and potentially endanger the lives of our elected officials and even the vice president. And the terror that was inflicted, it shook the nation in many ways. Yeah, I understand people didn't blow the building up. I understand that many were in there peacefully. I understand it. It's nonetheless miserably wrong, but that's the recklessness of what could happen. So it's almost like, okay, thankfully we didn't have anything happen really, really badly until then, but then it tarnishes everything else. And then you don't know what else could happen and how Americans who are upset on this side or that side, how they can be provoked. Look, I believe the secular media, the left-wing media is responsible in certain ways for the ugliness of what's happened with rioting and even some of the depth of division in America. I believe the secular media often feeds into that. And then with misreporting and stuff like that, it further provokes people. So there are a lot of people responsible for the inflammatory situation in which we find ourselves where things are just ready to ignite, explode in a moment's time. But I believe that once President Biden was recognized as president, that it was right for Prime Minister Netanyahu to congratulate him. Remember, Netanyahu has a history with Biden as well as he has a history with Trump. He probably has a longer history with Biden. And this is the new reality. This is who you're working with. So to say, well, I have to be more loyal to Trump. No, I don't say that. Tell the people of Israel, hey, we can't work with the new administration because we don't think it's valid, or because my good friend Donald Trump doesn't think it's valid. You can't do that. So this is just another thing when I look at, it's like, okay, those are problems. So I wrote an article, and on one conservative political website, it was not received favorably. When I last looked, the only ratings were the worst you could rate it, and it had well over 500 comments. And if I looked through them, I only glanced at it, but I imagined the vast majority would be negative. But I said, hey, Trump knocked the door down. Trump showed there's a different way of getting things done, and you don't have to play the old political games, and you just do what you believe is right and what the people elected you to do, and that's what you do. And you bypass the good old boy syndrome and get things done. He's reminded us or shown us that you can do things differently than the standard political way. But now that he's knocked that door down, let another conservative with backbone run in 2024. That would be my preference. So let's get the good without the collateral damage. And if you say, no, only Donald Trump can save America, then I say that's the very idolatry I've been warning against for years. So I say this as someone who voted for him in 2016 and 2020 with certain levels of misgivings and concerns, but feeling far and away he was the best man for the job once he was the candidate. So him versus Hillary, him versus Biden. And I voted, and I don't regret doing that. However, as things unfolded, as I saw the depth of damage that had been done and the degree of idolatry that was there in the church, okay, we have big lessons to learn. If we don't learn them moving forward, we'll repeat some of the same mistakes. Okay, I've gotten that out. We'll get to some calls. We've got a bunch of other things to talk about today. Let's have a conversation. 866-34-TRUTH. Can we really make the scripture say, can we twist the Bible in any direction? Can we take a verse and get a wrong message from it? Yeah, if you read it wrongly, if you treat it wrongly, you can. So there's an example that's commonly used where Jesus is speaking to Judas. So it's John chapter 13 and verse 27. They're at the Last Supper, and it says, after he had taken the morsel, so Judas takes the morsel, Satan entered into him. Jesus said to him, what you are going to do, do quickly. Then you read another verse, and it says, Judas hung himself. Then you have Jesus saying elsewhere, go and do likewise. You've seen this done, go and do likewise. You can pull a verse here, 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 and put it together to make a message that's totally contrary to the Bible. You could do the same thing with any book. You could do the same thing with a phone book, and pull out a page here and a line here and a sentence there to make it mean whatever you want. But if you read the Bible rightly, no, you can't make it mean whatever you want it to mean. You can't make it say whatever you want it to say. So what's the key? Read everything in proper context and read everything with respect to the type of literature it is. Understand poetry is poetry. If the Bible says God is our rock, it doesn't mean that he is a physical rock. If you're reading something that Paul wrote, don't just pull out the one line, look at the whole letter. And then if you need more context, look at Paul's other letters. Or if you need more context, look at the rest of the New Testament. Or if you need the fullest context, look at the whole Bible. And then understand, as God speaks and reveals himself, that we get more and more insight into who he is and his nature, not contradicting what comes before, but clarifying as we continue to always.
It's The Line of Fire with your host, Dr. Michael Brown, your voice of moral, cultural, and spiritual revolution. Here again is Dr. Michael Brown.
Thanks, friends, for joining us on The Line of Fire, 866-348-7884. Okay, I want to have a rational discussion about a very emotional subject. The whole issue of men who identify as women competing in sports with other women. I just want to talk to you about this. I want to ask some questions because, as bizarre as it seems to me, as unfathomable as it seems to me, as unfair as it seems to me, I know there's some of you listening and you think, no, it's fine, it's good. There are all these standards. The Olympics set this up years ago. And that once these men undergo the right with, they take drugs to block testosterone, and they take estrogen pills and so on. So it balances things out. So here, I don't understand this. Maybe somebody can help me understand, but I don't understand this. I am a little under 6'3", right? I'm a male, right? I have certain bone structure, bone density, but my height is what it is. The size of my body is what it is. Muscles are what they are, right? Okay, so even if, or let's not use me as an example. Let's use something absolutely, indisputably, overwhelmingly clear. Okay, let's say I'm Shaquille O'Neal. I'm 7'2", and what was Shaquille O'Neal's playing weight? Was it 300 pounds? I don't know. If Shaquille O'Neal, to the core of his being, 15 years ago, felt that he was actually a female and went to play in the WNBA, even with going all through the therapy and 2 years of transitioning as a woman, and of course he's going to have a massive advantage over all the other players. I mean, how could it be any different? Why is this a mystery? So here, I've got a new article on this, and you can read it on the stream. It's exclusively on the stream, stream.org. Can we have a rational discussion about biological males competing against biological females? Okay? All right. We just found out, before I get into this article, just found something out. So I apologize to those who have called in about favorite book. My apologies. Our feed somehow dropped out. I was talking about something 100% different. You were listening to an old show and calling in response to it. So I'm not taking calls today about favorite books of the Bible. Okay. 2 years or more. First question. Second, in your heart of hearts, are you sure that this is fair to the other women? So listen to a little snippet of this interview. This is Will, now known as Leah Thomas. He is swimming on the female team at the University of Pennsylvania. Previously, he had been on the men's team, on the second team on the men. Now, swimming with the women, he's not just doing well, he is demolishing records. And the women are in tears and disheartened. Listen to what he has to say. Remember, the world is referring to him as she, as Leah. Listen to what he had to say.
So I started my transition period in May of 2019. That's when I started hormone replacement therapy, which is the medical transition for trans people. For trans women, it's a combination of estrogen and testosterone blockers, which basically gives you female puberty, and you see fat redistribution, muscle loss, facial changes, all that.
Yeah, so here is, again, you hear the individual, does not sound like, well, okay, they're women with deeper voices. Okay, understand that. But you're talking about someone who, as a male, please hear this, as a male, was on the second team, right? So not first string, not top line, second team. Now, as a female, is winning so overwhelmingly that it's making a mockery of the competition. And some of the women, they've been told by the coaches, don't say anything, the university administration, don't say anything, but they're speaking up. They're speaking up because of what's actually happening. So let me share a little bit from this article. And, let me just, here, Daily Mail, 2018, ran a headline, students and parents demand unfair rule change after 2 transgender teen sprinters come first and second in the Girls States Championship months after one competed as a boy. And look at this. I'm going to scroll down in my article here, and the University of Pennsylvania is excited about this. The women are in second place after day one of the Zippy Invitational. Leah Thomas set a pool and meet record in the 500 free. A meet record. This is Will Thomas, who was second string as a male, now setting a meet record as a female. And it goes on from there. So Barbara Kay wrote an op-ed for the Western Standard titled Trans Athletes Create a Competitive Imbalance in Sports. And Barbara Kay said this, the switch from male to female competition so significantly upgraded Thomas's athletic status and made the difference between anonymity, she never would have heard of him ever, and stardom. But most significantly, it meant a worthy female competitor was unfairly bumped downward in the standings so Thomas could feel included. As in other cases of trans women athletic performance, natal male inclusion came at the expense of a female competitor's exclusion. And then look at this. This is so striking. Barbara Kay wrote this. One need only compare women's Olympic records to those set by boys still in high school to see the stark physical difference between male and female elite athletes, or the humiliation of the Australian national women's soccer team by 15-year-old boys. In 1998, tennis legends Venus and Serena Williams, ranked number 5 and number 17 in the world respectively at the time, played against an aging male player named Karsten Brosch, ranked 203rd among men. Brosch beat Serena 6-1 and Venus 6-2. Cici Telfer ranked 390th among American male 400-meter hurdles 2017 NCAA Division II athletics for the male 400-meter hurdles. After a year off for hormone therapy, Telfer won the women's NCAA championship. So from being the 390th male to the number 1 female. How'd that happen if he had no unfair advantage? And hilariously, Kay added that Telfer claims to be at a disadvantage because at 6'2", she encounters greater wind resistance. Oddly, that didn't hurt Usain Bolt. All right, I could go on further. I saw an interview where Serena Williams, arguably the greatest women's player of all time, so the GOAT, the greatest of all time, many, if not most, would put her there as the greatest female tennis player of all time. She said if she could play against Andy Murray, now Andy's not, in terms of recent men, wouldn't even be in the top 3, might have been a 4 or 5 or something like that. She said if I played against him, I would lose 6-love in 5 or 6 minutes. I mean, she was exaggerating 5 or 6 minutes, but she would be instantly crushed by him. And she said, look, women's tennis is women's tennis, men's tennis is men's tennis. So you're telling me that if one of these top male players identified as female, to the core of his being, believed he was female, and then transitioned, so gets on testosterone blockers, gets on estrogen treatments, that he still would not have an unfair advantage? You say, oh yeah, it'll work out. Well, then explain to me how these men who were second-rate men, these men who were anything but champs, these men who are on second team, these men who were ranked 390th in their field, now are winning and even demolishing records among females. You tell me how that, please, someone enlighten me. I'm waiting for the enlightenment. I care about these people who are struggling with gender identity. I want to see them whole from the inside out. But don't tell me this is fair to women. So please, if you're an advocate for this, explain to me how these men who failed are now winning big as females. I'm all ears. We'll be right back. You know, there are Jewish scholars who believe that Jesus was a good guy, that he was a rabbi, Orthodox rabbi, a fine Jewish teacher, and that he's not the one responsible for all the changes or founding, quote, Christianity. Rather, Paul changed things. You'll often hear that. There are liberal Christian scholars who believe the same thing, that Paul changed things, that he changed the gospel. Rabbi Shmuley, in his book, Kosher Jesus, that I answered and rebutted in my book, The Real Kosher Jesus, he holds to this view as well, that Paul started this whole thing, that Paul's the one who taught about vicarious suffering and Jesus dying as a substitute for our sins, and that Paul taught the deity of Jesus and introduced these new concepts. And some even look at verses, say like Romans chapter 2, verse 16, Romans 2:16, where Paul speaks of that day, on that day when, speaking of a final day of judgment, according to my gospel, God judges the secrets of man by Messiah Jesus. So, in other words, they're saying that Paul's saying God will judge man by my gospel. And that's because he preached this new message. Well, first, that's not how I read what he's saying. Rather, I understand what he's saying is, just as I teach in my gospel, God's going to judge everyone at the end. He's not saying God's going to judge everyone based on my specific gospel message, but rather as I preach, when I preach the gospel, my gospel message that I preach, I tell you that God's going to bring judgment. But here's what we know. And I've laid this out in volume 4 of my series, Answering Jewish Objections to Jesus. And David Wenham has a couple of great books on it. All of the major themes of the gospel that Jesus taught, Paul taught. And Jesus said in Mark 10 that he would be a ransom for our souls, and that the new covenant was made in his body and blood, which was broken for us and shed for us, and that he himself clearly identified as deity in a number of different passages in the Gospels, and that he appeared to Saul of Tarsus as the risen Lord, that Saul refers to him as Lord and bows down before him. So there is nothing new that Paul is introducing. Rather, Paul had the revelation that one day Gentile and Jew would be one in the Messiah, and that time had already come. That's what he understood, and that Gentiles did not need to become Jews in order to be saved. But all the fundamentals, I've laid it out, others have laid it out, all the fundamentals of the gospel, read in 1 Corinthians 15 where he lays them out. Those are the fundamentals taught by all the other apostles. Those are the fundamentals that we find in the Gospels. And by the way, Paul couldn't just change everything without changing all of the early church, which was obviously not what happened. Rather, he was an esteemed fellow worker in the Lord.
It's The Line of Fire with your host, Dr. Michael Brown. Get into the line of fire now by calling 866-34-TRUTH. Here again is Dr. Michael Brown.
Thanks, friends, for joining us on the Line of Fire. 866-348-7884 is the number to call. You know, one reason we've talked about transgender issues is because of what's happening with kids. Do you know how many parents I've talked to, grandparents, individuals dealing with kids struggling with gender identity, confusion, and in many cases, it's happened out of the blue. In other words, not a history since the child was little. I just read an article on the Stream, and it was talking about a parent and what happened with this parent's daughter and what she went through and how suddenly at a certain age she began to identify this and then role played in this and watched this and did this. And I sent it over to another mother who is dealing with struggles with her teenage daughter. And she wrote back absolutely devastated, said this is line for line, step for step, exactly what happened with my daughter. There are social forces. There are things kids are being exposed to. There are some quite nefarious and intentional. There are others that are less intentional, but they are having this destructive effect on kids. And now there is a growing number of young people who are trying to detransition. Well, if you're a 20-year-old female and you've already had a full mastectomy and you have already castrated yourself chemically so that you cannot conceive a child, right? And you made these decisions to move in this direction when you were 11 or 12 with the encouragement of medical doctors and therapists and others. Hang on. How do you fix that? How do you detransition? So you go back to your real identity as a female, but you are marred for life. It is a growing epidemic. It cannot be downplayed. If it happened to one kid, it's too many. But you are talking about thousands and thousands and thousands of young people wrongly influenced. When you have someone like Jazz Jennings, who needs our prayer for wholeness from the inside out, he does from the inside out. When you have someone like that as perhaps the most influential teen in American reality TV star, so millions are being affected and countless thousands going through regret and pain, of course we have to speak up. Of course we do. 866-34-TRUTH. And as long as these things are happening in the schools, we'll talk about it. We warned this stuff was coming years ago. We warned it was coming. Here it is. What are we going to do about it? Let's go over to Norwalk, Connecticut. Stephen, welcome to the Line of Fire.
Hello, Dr. Brennan. Thank you for taking my call.
Sure.
I was wondering, sir, I'm not aware of anything like this, but are you aware of anyone, either at the professional or semi-pro level, any born female transitioning to male, participating in professional male sports? Because I've heard stories, of course, of the reverse, but I've never heard of a story of a biologically born woman transitioning to male to partake in any of sports of that higher ability. Have you ever heard of such a thing?
No, the closest thing is a girl in high school transitioning to male as a wrestler. So on testosterone and now crushing all the female competition and saying, well, I would wrestle with the males. Of course, that, you know, the men don't want to wrestle with a woman, et cetera. And it wouldn't be fair to her either. But that's as far as I've seen it go. So she has all the advantages of the testosterone treatments to boost herself, and she's crushed the other women's competition. But no, I mean, how would it work, right? The world's fastest woman can't come anywhere near the world's fastest man, or, you know, whatever the distances are. You know what's extraordinary? That Roger Bannister breaks the 4-minute mile barrier, right? What was that, in the 50s? And it's landmark and so on. And then it gets down to, I don't know, what's 342. I mean, it's extraordinary how far it went down, and it stayed there for some years among the men. And every year there are many kids in high school now, boys, who break a 4-minute mile commonly. The world record for the fastest female mile, I believe, is about 4 minutes, 12 seconds. So you've got a disparity, right? So if she the world's fastest female, or the world's best female basketball player, or whatever you want to put it, the female boxer of the year, whatever sport you want to take, right? Whatever it is, pole vaulting, anything, speed skating, you take the very best woman. If she then identifies as a man and even gets all kinds of boosting testosterone, whatever, she's still going to be crushed. There's no
which is why I can't understand it.
Yeah, exactly.
I can't. You know, I can see it in, and I don't know if this is a good analogy, but in let's say the previously male-only professions, or some of the tougher ones like firefighting or police or even the military, none of which I have any experience in. It would not bother me one bit if it was a man or woman rescuing me from a burning building, or you know, coming to my aid, or fighting and defending me. That could be done in whatever way those professions see fit, because there's not maybe there's not quite as much passion involved in it as a spectator. But it seems to me it's a little deceptive at best, because the few women that I know personally that participate recreationally in these sports, whether they're straight women, lesbian women, gay, whatever have you, they have no interest in disclosing or even talking about or giving up their femaleness or femininity. They simply want to play with the better people they want. And yet I don't see that going on here. It seems to me that the people you've presented as example are they have another agenda here. That seems to be almost victory at all costs. If I can't win as a man, I win as a woman. And I wonder if I'm reading this correctly, but I don't see this. I don't see them going for the tougher ones. I see this being made more of victory seems to be the goal here rather than a fair competition.
Right. So let's
to me either.
Yeah. So let's think of it like this. Number one, let's give the benefit of the doubt and say that this person is struggling with gender identity and feels they're mismatched, they're in the wrong body. Let's give them the benefit of the doubt. And they love running, they love swimming, they love whatever it is, so they want to keep competing. And they're thinking, hey, I'm taking all these drugs to slow me down, to make it harder, and I'm pushing hard, I'm athletic, I'm going to win. But ultimately, if you're an athlete, don't you want to win? Yes. So according to some of these gals, and in fact, I need to read some of the quotes from the article. They said, look, the coach wants to win. So now they're winning all these competitions, and they're so upset. They said, normally you practice hard, you give it your all, and you have a chance. But here, before you even start, you don't have any possible chance. And who wants to do their best and work for years to reach a certain level to know that you're gonna come in a distant second at best in a competition? So whether the motivation is to win at any cost, either way, it ends up terribly unfair. And there's just no reason for it. I draw attention to it because it's part of the larger cultural insanity. Hey, Stephen, thank you for the call. I appreciate it. And look, there are plenty of women in certain sports that you'll participate with men or train with men on a certain level, but it's not going to be, like mixed martial artists, you might train together and stuff, but you're not going to get in the ring, the world's best 150-pounder or whatever male against the world's best 150-pounder female. Everyone would say it's unfair, and there could be serious injury or death that resulted in it. So these are the issues. What about fairness to women? What about equality? And in the midst of all this now, I'm looking at this headline, Daily Wire, School District of Philadelphia allowing students to identify as non-binary without parental consent. This is madness, friends. And when I talk about trans sanity, I'm not talking about people who struggle. My heart goes out to people who struggle. And it's going to take tremendous compassion and patience to really help them find wholeness from the inside out rather than mutilating the bodies that God gave them and being on hormone treatments for life. And then in the end, still not being fully what they want to be. Well, I've seen quotes, quote, trans women are women. Well, how do you define a woman? You don't have a uterus. You can never possibly conceive, have a child. You don't go through a monthly cycle. You don't have life experience of women. What is a woman then? Just how you feel about yourself? Is that what defines sex now? Gender? Just how you feel about yourself? But my big concern is the children, is the young people, is those that are now going through all kinds of confusion because of this and pain. And I'm talking to parents that say the schools are working against us. The schools are doing things without our knowledge. The schools are affirming things in our kids that we don't agree with. And we as parents are the ones that are responsible. And the schools, where's this agenda come from? What's behind it? Why this all-out attack on male and female? He created them. And I'm just going to grab my article again and read a couple of quotes to you. Just got to find it once more. I've taken it off my screen here. Okay, what some of the gals that are competing against this biological male at the University of Pennsylvania, they've been told not to speak out, but they feel they have to. One said, pretty much everyone individually has spoken to our coaches about not liking this, but our coach just really likes winning. He's like most coaches. I think secretly everyone just knows it's the wrong thing to do. Second swimmer said this, the other ladies, they feel so discouraged because no matter how much work they put in it, they're going to lose. Usually they can get behind the blocks and know they out-trained all their competitors and they're going to win and give it all they've got. Now they're having to go behind the blocks knowing no matter what they do not have the chance to win. She said, I think it's really getting to everyone and it's reduced them to tears. She said this, while the university leaders say they care about all of us, our interests are in direct conflict with with the interest of Leah, that's this gentleman, in regards to fair competition and getting to compete. While we support Leah as a person to make decisions for her own life, you cannot make that decision and then come and impede on other people and their rights. And she said this, your right doesn't supersede everyone else's right. I know no matter what, biological women will never be on an equal playing field with transgender females. She said this, even without Leah, we had the chance to win the Ivy League this year, which is a huge deal for us. We train every single day and give up so much for the sport. And I love swimming. I do it because I love it. It's been a part of my life forever. And this is a slap in the face that the NCAA doesn't care about the integrity of women's sports. She said, this is such a cloud over everything. A cloud in the locker room, especially the last few days, because we all know of how things have changed in the last week. If you care about women, women's rights, fairness to women, you've got to stand up against this madness. And society has to. And if you care about kids and the well-being of kids and oppose their chemical castration, because that's what this comes down to, you've got to stand up and speak out. It must happen. It must be done. We'll be right back. For many people, the idea of a house church is somewhat odd. I mean, don't we need a formal building? Don't we need a church building or a cathedral or a building at least with a sanctuary and with a pulpit in the front and maybe with a cross in it? What about house churches? Well, here's the deal. We can meet anywhere as a body, as a congregation. We can meet in an open field. We can meet in a factory. We can meet in a house. We can meet in a church building. You could meet in a mosque and have a room in the mosque where you secretly meet to follow Jesus. You could meet anywhere as believers. And often in New Testament days and the decades that followed, the most common meeting place was the home. Look at what Paul writes in Romans, the 16th chapter. Romans 16, he says this, Greet Prisca and Aquila, my fellow workers in Christ Jesus, who risked their necks for my life, to whom not only I give thanks, but all the churches of the Gentiles give thanks as well. Greet also the church in their house. So this was common. A church is not a building. A church is the people, the believers. All right, so we gather together as believers in all different settings. As long as there are communities devoted to the Lord with godly leadership that's been raised up to shepherd or nurture, it can be in a house, it can be in a church building, it can be in an auditorium, it can be in an open field. The venue is not the big issue. The issue is that people are coming together as a body, as a family, as a community, that they're growing, and that there are leaders that have been appointed by God to shepherd the flock. And let me say this, if you're part of a big congregation, that's wonderful. And you meet together with thousands on a Sunday morning, that's wonderful. But it's good to meet as well in small groups in homes because there's an intimacy that develops, there's a growth that comes out of it, there's a fellowship, there's a nurturing that you can only find in small groups.
Activist, author, international speaker, and theologian, Dr. Michael Brown. Your voice of moral, cultural, and spiritual revolution. Get into the line of fire now by calling 866-34-TRUTH. Here again is Dr. Michael Brown.
You know, we reported last week on what happened in Canada, that the Canadian government passed a ban on so-called conversion therapy for people of all ages. What it boils down to is, if you have unwanted same-sex attraction, you're a woman, 30 years old, you're a man, 40 years old, you're married with kids, but you're struggling with unwanted same-sex attraction, and you want professional counseling to help you get to the root of your struggles, illegal. Illegal. If you'd like to be affirmed in your same-sex attraction, perfectly fine. If your 15-year-old kid tormented by gender identity confusion and say, look, I'm in a female body. I want to be female. I'd like to have children one day, but I feel like I'm a boy. I'm like tormented. I want to get counseling to get to the root of it. Illegal. Oh, but get on all kinds of hormone things where, let's say you're 12 years old, get on puberty blockers and then have a full mastectomy at 18. That's legal. Madness. That's what I call transanity. That is cultural madness. And of course, there will be legal pushback. And I've called on pastors throughout Canada, say no to this. Say, we're going to counsel, and we're going to help people that need help, period. Well, over in the UK, as they were looking to push a similar ban, there's been a rising up of leaders in the UK. They have graciously and lovingly expressed why they differ with this. Those who struggled in these areas are coming forth with their own testimonies. And I'm looking at a website now where leaders have said that we will not comply with this law. In other words, we're going to minister to people that need ministry regardless. And right now I'm looking at 2,273 pastors, leaders in England, Christian leaders saying, we will not comply with this. This is what has to happen. There has to be this healthy and holy pushback in love, with grace, saying we care about everyone and we're not forcing anyone to live their life in a way they don't want to. How they live their lives is between them and God. But when someone comes and says, I want help, we are going to provide that help, whether it's legal or not. God bless them for doing that. And may grace and truth prevail. And may there be a holy pushback in Canada. Let's go over to Skip in northern Utah. Welcome to the Line of Fire.
Yes, hello, Dr. Brown. Thanks for taking my call.
Sure.
All of these issues pretty much have the same thing to do with everything. It's getting people to live on their emotions rather than thinking logically. Black Lives Matter, the transgender issue, the gay rights, the abortion, it's all playing on young people's emotions, and it's coming down to parenting. We're losing parents, they just can't keep up with everything that's going on, and it's affecting the children. I'll hang up and listen. Thank you.
Yeah, so thanks for weighing in, Skip. Let me say a few things. So I recognize that there are kids as young as 3 and 4 that struggle with gender identity issues. And parents don't know where it came from. They say, we raised our kid the same as others. That's the story that as far as they can tell. But 80% or more of those kids, if you just are loving with them, gracious towards them, but don't dress them in opposite sex clothes, don't call them by opposite sex names, just say, well, this is, just work with them patiently. The vast majority, 80% more than that, once they go through puberty, will no longer struggle with that. So that's the first thing. But when you get to a certain age, what's called rapid onset gender dysphoria, which is suddenly happening with girls 15, 16 years old, sometimes groups of them, often those who suffer with autism on a certain level. You add that in for whatever reason, psychological reason, you are now seeing this epidemic of these kids out of the blue. It's not that they struggled all their life, out of the blue, identifying as these girls saying we're actually male and want to transition. And then a few years later, many of them are deeply regretting the decisions and what they did to their bodies, and the fact that either parents went along with it or medical professionals say this is the right thing. It's horrific. And on certain levels, some would say it's criminal to do this. It is, according to Dr. Paul McHugh, long time head of the psychiatric department at Johns Hopkins, and a long time opponent of sex change surgery, saying we're dealing with the wrong problem, we're fixing the wrong thing. He said that dealing with anything chemically, where you're dealing with children, right? So a boy identifying as a girl, vice versa, and you're putting chemicals in their body, puberty blockers, different things. He said child abuse. It's child abuse. This is what he said. And I had that quote before I went on Tyra Banks to discuss this years ago. It is. And it is utterly irresponsible of so many medical professionals to go in this direction. And there are legal cases being brought, for example, in UK, saying you should have slowed us down. You should have stopped us along the way. I'm hoping to do an interview with someone who is as far away from me in terms of beliefs about the Bible, beliefs about God, beliefs about homosexuality, those kind of things. Do an interview with this transgender identified individual, and we are shouting at the top of our lungs together to help and save children from this. That's the diversity of people coming together, raising their voices. So, sir, in response to your call, there is something that's being played on emotionally. And when you compare notes and see so many of these kids were exposed to this, and at a vulnerable age, when kids are going through changes and questioning things, and now they're getting bombarded with all this nonsense and all the wrong examples, and now the transgender superheroes and on and on. And the fact that you have now a massive jump for the first time in poll history, a massive jump now in Gen Zers identifying as bisexual. Where did that come from? It was always latently. No, it wasn't always there. Where did that come from? So the challenge for parents is you don't know what's out there. You don't know what your kid's getting exposed to. Look, there's a story, the very popular singer now, Billie Eilish, and she's talking about getting exposed to porn starting when she was 11, and then how far it went, and just very descriptive of the horrific things that she would watch. And then when she started relationships, she thought, well, you're supposed to do all this. You're not supposed to say no. She said it scarred her. Hopefully she'll get some real help. And she's been open about it. I'm sure people reaching out to try to help her from the inside out. She said, it messed with my brain. So kids are being exposed to a lot of stuff that, as a parent, how do you keep up with all of it? And when you try to be super restrictive, you can't have this, because I don't want to expose, then many times it just pushes the kids to further rebellion or anger or hurt or pain or suicidal ideation. It's very challenging. Boy, we need the Lord's grace in the midst of our homes today and in parenting. But when you mentioned the pushing emotional buttons, so of course, as Americans, if you love God, you love your neighbor. If you're any kind of a true Christian at all or any person of conscience, of course you say that every Black life matters. Of course you say if there's unfair treatment of our Black neighbors, we stand against it. Of course you say if there's systemic injustice anywhere, we want to confront it. If you're a person of conscience, if you're a true believer and love God, love your neighbor, of course. But the BLM movement, with its Marxist roots, with its queer ideology, with so many other things that are wrong, and the hatred and the racism that it espouses. If you say something about BLM, how could you say? So a lot of things are fueled emotionally. What we have to do is step back. Here, I tweeted something. Let's just put this tweet up again. And I had 2020. Of course, it's 2021. And I said, look, here's my take on what happened January 6, 2021. Number one, it cannot be called an insurrection, as heinous and inexcusable as it was. Two, Trump did not expect it to happen, nor was it his goal or intent. Three, yet his irresponsible rhetoric in previous days and on that day led directly to the storming of the Capitol. This is so much in the news. I wanted to weigh in with my perspective and cultivate discussion. Okay, we can take it down. So I noticed, I don't read all comments anywhere. I wish I had the time to. I wish even better, I could interact with everyone, but it's just not feasible. So I noticed, a certain number of people responding to it on Twitter. Not a lot, but I did read a few of the comments, and they were bashing me either, how dare you speak a word against President Trump, or how dare you defend President, whatever it was, right? Which I fully expected. Something like that, I'm going to get hit from both sides. So I just tweeted one response and said, hey, I welcome the attack from both sides. I expect it. But it would be great if you interacted with each other. Oh, wouldn't that be great? I've had people say, well, everyone knows the election was stolen and you know it was stolen. You just don't have the courage to speak out against it. If I knew it was stolen, I would speak out against it. But I don't know. And I know articulate, very sharp, very studied, very balanced people on both sides who say no proof it was stolen, absolute proof it was stolen. And God has not called me or burdened me, directed me to spend the necessary hundreds of hours to unpack things and go through all the hearings and listen to all the testimony to come to a final conclusion. Plus, I believe that with so many millions of people praying that we got God's result, whether it was blessing or judgment, we got God's result. And I was trusting that our court system would work, rather it's the Supreme Court. So if there was corruption, it would come forward. Now, you can have a different opinion on that. That's fine. Just don't tell me I know. Just like I'm not going to say, everyone knows it wasn't stolen, or everyone knows it was stolen. But can we talk to each other about it? Instead of living in our own echo chambers, how about we have honest discussions that make us a little uncomfortable, but with the goal of learning from each other or sharpening each other's position or allowing challenge to come so you can see how solid your position is. Isn't that the right thing to do? If I'm wrong, show me. If you're wrong, I'll show you. If we just learn from each other, sharpen each other, or learn to love and appreciate one another in the midst of our differences, isn't that a victory? Back with you for Thoroughly Jewish Thursday tomorrow.